You probably saw the headline and paused. The Supreme Court could be on the verge of issuing an emergency ruling that would fundamentally change gun laws across the United States. This isn't speculation or political rhetoric. This is a legal decision with immediate consequences that could affect millions of Americans overnight. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that the rules governing your right to own a firearm could be overturned almost instantly. No gradual changes, no lengthy appeals, just a high-stakes legal shift that could redefine gun ownership nationwide. The implications are enormous, touching not only individual rights but also the very balance between state authority and constitutional protections. Today, we are going to break down exactly what this ruling could mean, who it affects, and why experts are calling it a safeguard against unconstitutional laws. For decades, gun laws in America have been a source of heated debate. On one side, proponents of stricter gun regulations argue that public safety requires more oversight, pointing to mass shootings, urban gun violence, and accidental firearm deaths as evidence that tighter control is essential. On the other side, advocates for Second Amendment rights insist that any restriction on gun ownership is a direct infringement on constitutional liberties, emphasizing that law-abiding citizens should not bear the burden of regulations aimed at criminals. The Supreme Court case under discussion sits squarely at the intersection of these two perspectives. Unlike previous cases that often addressed individual states or localized policies, this emergency ruling has the potential to affect gun permits nationwide. Whether you live in California, Texas, New York, or Florida, the landscape of gun ownership could change dramatically and immediately. The emergency nature of the Supreme Court's involvement is highly significant. Typically, the court hears cases over months or years after lower court decisions have already set precedents. Emergency rulings, however, are reserved for situations where immediate action is necessary to prevent irreparable harm. Legal experts are stressing that this case could be the most important decision on gun permits in decades. At stake is the constitutionality of laws that, according to petitioners, overreach federal or state authority and infringe upon citizens' rights. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of the plaintiffs, many existing permit requirements could be suspended or eliminated entirely, pending further legal review. This is not a minor procedural matter. It is a potential national shift in the balance between government regulation and individual freedoms. At the core of this case is the principle of constitutional protection. Petitioners argue that current gun laws violate the Second Amendment by imposing unnecessary and unreasonable barriers to responsible citizens who wish to exercise their right to bear arms. These laws include extensive background checks, mandatory waiting periods, and, in some states, near-total restrictions on certain types of firearms. Critics of these regulations argue that they fail to improve public safety and instead penalize law-abiding Americans. The Supreme Court is now tasked with balancing the need for safety with the protection of a fundamental constitutional right, a responsibility that carries profound consequences for every citizen. The Department of Justice, along with several states, has weighed in to support the emergency petition, signaling the national importance of this case. By backing the move, they are highlighting the urgency of preventing laws that may be unconstitutional from continuing to restrict citizens. This is not just about one law or one state. It is about establishing a precedent that will influence how legislation is interpreted and enforced for years to come. Advocacy groups, politicians, and legal scholars are all closely monitoring the case, aware that the court's decision could redefine the boundaries between state control and individual rights in ways that extend far beyond this single ruling. Critics of strict gun permit laws emphasize that these regulations often fail to prevent crime while burdening law-abiding citizens. Studies have shown that most gun-related incidents occur outside the framework of legal ownership, typically involving individuals who obtain firearms illegally. From this perspective, emergency intervention by the Supreme Court could prevent laws that restrict responsible citizens without actually improving public safety. Supporters of strict regulations argue that oversight is necessary to prevent mass shootings and ensure community safety, especially in areas with historically higher rates of gun violence. This tension, the balance between personal liberty and collective security, is precisely why this ruling is attracting nationwide attention. For everyday gun owners, the question is urgent. How does this affect me? If the Supreme Court sides with the petitioners, states that currently impose stringent permit requirements could see those processes temporarily halted. Individuals who are in the process of applying for permits may have restrictions lifted, and existing gun owners might face fewer bureaucratic obstacles. However, it is crucial to understand that this is an emergency ruling, not a permanent resolution. While it could change the status quo quickly, lower courts may still review and potentially modify the outcome over time. Citizens must stay informed to ensure compliance while exercising their rights responsibly. The timing of this case is particularly noteworthy. Across the United States, tensions over gun legislation have been high, especially in states with more restrictive laws. Advocacy groups have mobilized, holding rallies, lobbying lawmakers, and engaging in public campaigns to influence public opinion and pressure the judiciary. Emergency rulings are rare, and their immediate effects are often dramatic. Millions of Americans are closely watching this case because the outcome could shift the balance of power between state authorities and individual rights almost overnight, and the societal repercussions will be felt far beyond the courtroom. Historically, the Supreme Court has issued rulings on gun rights that vary widely, creating a patchwork of legal standards across different states. Some rulings have upheld certain regulations, while others have struck down restrictions deemed unconstitutional. A nationwide emergency ruling could unify or redefine these standards, providing clarity on what constitutes a legitimate limitation on gun ownership. Legal scholars are watching because the reasoning the court uses in this decision could influence countless future cases affecting not just gun legislation, but the broader interpretation of constitutional rights. The social and political implications are also significant. Gun rights groups are likely to celebrate a ruling that eases restrictions, framing it as a victory for constitutional liberty and individual responsibility. Conversely, gun control advocates warn that loosening permit requirements could increase risks, particularly in urban areas or communities with higher rates of gun-related incidents. This creates a delicate balance. The Supreme Court must uphold constitutional protections while considering the real-world consequences for public safety. The decision is likely to spark debates, media coverage, and further legal challenges across multiple states. Emergency rulings often have practical consequences that extend beyond legal theory. Law enforcement agencies, state regulatory offices, and firearm retailers may need to adjust procedures almost immediately if the ruling is enacted. Guidelines for compliance, permit issuance, and background checks could change, creating both opportunities and challenges for citizens and authorities alike. It will be essential for gun owners to stay informed about the specifics in their state to ensure they act within the bounds of the law while exercising their rights. The Supreme Court's deliberations are expected to be fast-moving, reflecting the urgency of the case. Analysts predict that a decision could be announced within days or weeks, rather than months. When it does arrive, it will dominate headlines and generate extensive commentary from legal experts, policymakers, and advocacy groups. Citizens, especially those directly affected by gun laws, will need clarity on how to navigate the new legal landscape. This is not just a legal story. It is a moment that could redefine the relationship between government authority and individual freedoms in the United States. Beyond immediate practical effects, the ruling could also influence the political landscape. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle will likely react to the decision, using it as a reference point for future legislation. Gun rights organizations may feel emboldened to challenge additional regulations, while gun control advocates may push for alternative measures to ensure public safety within the framework allowed by the court. The ripple effect of this decision will extend far beyond the courtroom, shaping political discourse, lobbying efforts, and public opinion on gun ownership for years to come. The human element cannot be ignored either. Millions of Americans who own guns legally could see their daily lives impacted. The ability to acquire, carry, or register firearms may become simpler in some states or may remain complicated in others depending on follow-up decisions by lower courts. Citizens will need to understand not just the ruling itself, but also how it interacts with state-specific laws, background checks, and enforcement policies. Being proactive and informed is crucial to ensure compliance while exercising constitutional rights responsibly. This ruling also raises broader questions about the interpretation of the Second Amendment in the modern era. Courts have long struggled with defining the boundaries of lawful regulation versus individual liberty. Emergency decisions like this one are rare precisely because they carry immediate and far-reaching consequences. By acting quickly, the Supreme Court is signaling the seriousness of the constitutional issues at stake and highlighting the urgency of protecting citizens from potentially overreaching laws. This moment is not just about firearms, it is about the principle that constitutional rights must be preserved even in complex and evolving social contexts. In conclusion, the Supreme Court's emergency consideration of this case is more than a breaking news story. It is a landmark moment in the ongoing debate over gun rights in America. Whether you are a gun owner, policy advocate, or concerned citizen, the outcome could profoundly affect the nation. The court is weighing immediate relief against long-term constitutional principles, and the stakes could not be higher. By understanding the implications of this emergency ruling, from legal precedents to state-level enforcement, citizens can prepare for the changes that may come and engage knowledgeably in discussions about the balance between individual rights and public safety. The decision, when announced, will likely mark a turning point in the history of gun legislation, reshaping the way Americans think about firearms, permits, and constitutional protections for generations.